Hey man, what's going on? You about ready? About ready to record? What do you mean you're not going to be able to make it? But dude, we've had this plan for the past 3 weeks. It's going to be our first card game video back since the set dropped, and dude, I don't have any other ideas outside of this. I'm stuck. But, dude, that's what we do already. We always do videos that take the trash MPs and try to make them into something good. After a while, it just gets old. You know what? Fine. Just don't worry about it. We'll take care of it some other time. Alright. Yeah, cool. Bye. Great. Just great. Now what do I do for our next video? What is up, Bad Brood? Eric here with Team Badman, and welcome guys back to another edition of Bad Builds, where we talk about some of the decks we've been working on here at Team Badman to give you some ideas of stuff to try out, help you consider some cards that maybe you hadn't considered before, and just give you an idea of everything that we've been working on here. And this is our first edition after the drop of Awakening. Awakening dropped last week. As we know, people have been testing for quite a while before that, testing out as new MPs and new masteries come out, getting a feel for some of the new cards and finding what's going to be worthwhile and what's not. And of course, we have been doing that here as well. And we've been doing that with quite a few different decks. But if you guys remember, I did make a promise that as soon as the Black Conflict Mastery came out, I promised all you guys there would be one particular deck that I would work on as the very first deck that we would release for the post-Awakening series of Bad Builds, and that is Black Conflict Android 18. As you guys know, I've been a huge fan of the Android 18 stack for quite a long time. I think she has a lot of potential, especially right now in the metagame with the massive popularity of a lot of modifier-based physical attacks, particularly with Brawly being super popular throughout much of the Vengeance metagame. And even now, when you've got MPs like Hercule who can still utilize some of those modifiers and actually double them up in the case of Hercule's level 3. Plus, of course, Brawly is going to be super strong. You have physical modifiers on Gohan's level 3 and Trunks' level 3, respectively, from the new stacks. And there's going to be a lot of potential for some really strong physical attacks. So that gives 18 a definite niche spot for being kind of a counter to a lot of those very heavy modifier-based physical decks. And of course, I decided to stick with Black style for 18. We are now using the Black Conflict Mastery. Now there are two versions of this that I originally made. I made an anger-oriented version which utilized some of the new anger cards, Black Schematics in particular, to help gain some additional anger. And you throw in other cards like Black Dash, Black Combo, Black Overhead Burst, and whatnot. And it's worked out alright if you want to go a little bit more of an anger route. It's very usable, but at the same time there are personalities and masteries that just do it better. Especially with Android 13 being such a big thing. It is fun, but I also expect a lot of anger hate to come out of the new meta, so it's not so great. Instead, this version that I've worked on a lot is a beatsy mid-range kind of variant. And it's got a lot of tools to handle a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and I've really enjoyed it. There are some fun new card additions from Awakening that I'm really enjoying. And that's what we're going to cover here. I might cover the anger variant in a future video, something like that. But we are going to cover the new version of Black Android 18 made specifically for set 7, so let's go for it. Before we start really quick though, I want to acknowledge some changes around me, which I'm sure you guys can see. And right behind me here is the first one. I do have a new backdrop. It is no longer a blank wall or a window or something like that. I actually have a green screen, which I've had for a while, actually. I've had for a couple of months. Just haven't used it. My girlfriend got it for me, and it's all fantastic. But I finally set it up, and I've been using it mainly for our Dragon Ball Xenoverse 2 playthrough, which if you guys haven't seen that, I'll include a link to that down below for the full playlist. That way you guys can check all of that out. But I will be using it as the backdrop for this, and I might actually use it as a green screen at some point in the future for some of the card game related series. So if you guys would like that, let me know down in the comment section so that way I can iron out all the kinks and whatnot and actually get a good looking background going for you guys. Also, I have I have changed how I'm editing my videos a little bit. I did get rid of the iMac that I was originally using for it, sold that off for a relatively pretty penny, so that's good. I switched back to using Windows. I have a PC that I pieced back together that I'm using for all the editing. So some of the transitions might be a little bit different. It might feel look a little bit different, but it's still going to be the exact same kind of content. So hopefully you won't notice too many jarring differences, but just let me know if you guys do, and I will try and change them up accordingly. So now we're going to go ahead and get to the deck list, and as I always do, I'm going to start off with the setups, because we know Black has some fantastic setups, and this deck certainly is no exception. The first setup, though, is our only non-styled setup, which is, of course, 2 copies of Visiting the Past. That's something that Black deck really wants, the ability to get cards out of the discard pile, because as I've noted many times, discard pile recursion in Black sucks, to be completely honest. There's not a lot of good ways to rejuvenate cards unless you're specifically playing an MP that caters to it, like Piccolo or Cooler. So the ability to get some of the cards that you've used back out of the discard pile is a huge deal. Plus, it's a way to kind of mitigate any damage that you've taken and any cards you may have lost by being able to get them right back out of the discard pile. So it's very beneficial for that. It focuses a little bit more on the aggro side of things, but you can pick whatever you want. You'll see a lot of different options here based on whatever you need. Next up is 2 copies of possibly my favorite Black setup, Black Searching Technique. And in this metagame, I like it over Black Scout Maneuver, mainly for the reason that it actually has benefit throughout the duration of the game, as opposed to Scout Maneuver, which is very strong early game, especially considering that you can pick out certain very well-known targets that opposing decks may have, because a lot of decks do run very similar card compositions. But later on in the game, it's not anywhere near as good. You don't know what's still left in the deck. You might completely whiff, or even when the deck is full, you might completely whiff. You never know. So having the ability to pick and choose what you want with Searching Technique is a lot more effective for this deck. And it also gives you deck insight, which is something huge that you want for this deck. You want to be able to know what you're going to go up against and be able to tech accordingly. So that's a huge benefit there. And lastly is 2 copies of course, the first of many combat enders, Black Power Up. Black Power Up has a fantastic double fold effect in this deck, as it not only gives you the ability to end combat whenever you want, which is something 18 can do very well and loves to do, but you also get your stages back to full, which of course we like stages in this mastery. We like stages in this style. This style is all about stages and banishing and anger and damage. You get the idea. There's a lot this can do, but Power Up is a really big tool, especially considering there's going to be a lot of decks just want to punish for massive stage damage, and until you can get to some of those higher levels, you need all the stages that you can get. So this card helps you do that. Speaking of combat enders, there's one new combat ender in particular that came out of the Awakening set, which is now included in this deck, and I'm so excited that it's tested so well, and that's Earth Dragon Ball 7. Earth Dragon Ball 7 has the ability to be played straight from the hand, and if you do that, you can end combat. It's only once per game, but you get the ability to end combat, so it's another means to do it. Plus, there's no other Dragon Balls in the deck, so it's not really a loss if it gets captured, because you're not going to be using it for any other effect anyway. The only downside here is that if you're facing Dragon Ball oriented decks, Dragon Ball Victory decks, it's very easy for it to get captured at a bad time, and you may accidentally give your opponent the win because it was the last Dragon Ball they needed, or maybe they just got banished, something like that. So it needs to be played a little bit more carefully in some of those matchups, but you make it work, and it's another fantastic tool here in the deck. It's one that has been testing very well. It's an easy just kind of, oh, look at this. Oh, your hand was set up? Oh, too bad. And I'm just really enjoying it. If you haven't tried it, definitely go do it. It's totally worth it. Next up, we're going to talk about the events in the deck, which the events are arguably the bread and butter of the deck. There's a couple of them in particular that are huge deals for this deck, and they help it do what it does. I'm sure you've already got an idea. But we're going to start off with the only styled one in the deck, which is 3 copies of Black Foreshadowing. Again, it's another way to gain stages, which is a huge deal. Deals non-attack related damage. There's a lot of ways to banish cards out in this deck as well, so it's very easy to get it, doing 4, 5, 6 life cards straight off the deck. Endurance 3 is fantastic. It's It shouldn't have Endurance 3 on it, let's be honest. That is ridiculously good for a card this good. And it's a great asset to the deck. It's something that, is completely worth running in a more mid-range kind of black deck. And like I said, that's it for the styled ones. So you really do have to keep an eye out in this deck for cards like Sane Keyburst or Red Tandem Blast, because they will shut off some of your major tools in this deck. So it's something you really, really need to keep an eye on. Especially when you consider the first non-styled event in this deck, 3 copies of Unleashed. Of course, this is a game-changing card. We already knew that. We already know that. And it's just going to continue to gain traction. And this deck is a huge, huge deal because Android 18 wants to get to the higher levels. Level 1 is alright because you do get an action, you get the ability to recycle your hand if you don't like it. That's cool. But 2 is a dead spot. 2 is a super dead spot. You only get a +1 life card modifier. You don't get any kind of action. You don't really get much more than you got on level 1. So that sucks. But you get to 3 and you get almost constant modifier shut off for your opponents. You get the ability to tech any card you want to your hand from your top 6, which is great. And level 4, of course, is the best stage locking level in the entire game. All you have to do is hit with that energy attack, lower the power level 0, and in almost any case, they're not really going to be able to do anything. It's really going to stick your opponents in a bad way, and Unleashed helps you do that. Of course, there's not too many great attach cards in black, so we kind of had to work with that, and you'll see what I'm talking about later. But it's still a huge, huge deal, and this deck needed Unleashed. Absolutely needed it. Next up is 3 copies of Stare Down. We all know how good Stare Down is, being able to pick any card out of your opponent's hand and get rid of it. And it's even better now that Black Devious Mastery is gone, and there's not really that other method of removing cards from an opponent's hand. So it's gained a little bit more traction here. The inside is great, especially considering we don't really have many ways to look into our opponent's hand. It helps set up some other cards. It's a big, big deal, and it completely is worth 3 of. I can't see a reason to not run that many. Next is 2 copies of Villainous Energy Sphere. We all know how good spheres are. They demand a lot of money, and now they're not demanding as much. That's because there are a lot more of them, courtesy of Awakening reprinting them. But they're still super powerful, especially with Unleashed running around just about everywhere. 3 copies is a little bit too much. You don't want to draw it at bad times or when your opponent doesn't have any real events to play. And 1, you won't really see it very often, so 2 is a really nice middle ground for that. I run 2 spheres in just about all my decks, and it seems to be a standard, so that's worthwhile there. 2 copies of Tug of War, which is a huge, huge deal card in black because it answers 2 of black's biggest issues, which is anger management and ally removal. Black sucks at that. Black really, really sucks at that, and having a freestyle card like this to help facilitate both is a huge, huge deal. Play it, your opponent loses 2 anger, banish an ally, shuffle it back into your life deck. It's got 2 endurance on it. We've seen just how outrageously powerful this card is throughout all of the Vengeance meta, and it's going to continue to be powerful unless ally decks just straight bottom out. But I can see decks that utilize allies such as Gohan and Cooler, and maybe even Brawly decks. I can see them still having a lot of benefit. Even Cell and Cell Jr., all the new stacks kind of utilize allies, so it's really going to be continuously beneficial. Big, big deal there. And of course, lastly, Time is a Warrior's Tool. We all know what it does. We all know how good it is. Moving on. And now we're on to our actual offensive cards. We're going to start with the physical combat cards, and there are some great physical attacks in black. Of course, we've got just there's just so many good options in here, depending on what you want to do. But for the sake of this deck, we've got a very, very streamlined package of physicals. A lot of physical blocks are being teched right now, so it's really, really easy to see some of them getting blocked or opponents having some kind of an answer. So we kind of wanted to lower on that a little bit, make opponents consider if they really want to hold on to their physical blocks. And then when they don't necessarily have them, hit them with some of the really, really effective cards that we have in the deck and that we need. Of course, that's going to start off with 3 copies of Black Defensive Burst. This is arguably Black's best physical. The ability to shut off opposing physical attacks is a big, big deal. It still does deal enough damage to hit the crit threshold, courtesy of the Conflict Mastery. It's just a great physical. I can't think of any black deck in recent memory that hasn't run this card at some count anywhere. Next is our other styled physical, and one of my favorite new cards from Awakening, and that's Black Flashback. Black Flashback is a rare that gives you the ability to look into your opponent's hand, and during that step while you're attacking with the card and dealing damage, you banish out a card from your opponent's hand, and then it returns at the beginning of their next action. So it's really, really nice for sniping out some of those particular blocks so that you can get another guarantee attack through, plus additional hand insight, which is beneficial with a bunch of other cards in the deck. And it's a big deal. It does deal out 4 life cards damage as well, so it can also crit. It's a fantastic card, it really is. I think the only downside, which is something that black players have been spoiled with a little bit, is that there isn't endurance on it, because a lot of really good black cards have endurance for some unknown reason, but that's alright. You make do with what you got, and it's a plenty powerful enough physical as it is. Definitely recommend trying it out, just like I did with Earth Dragon Ball 7. It's a really, really worthwhile physical, and it's tested very, very well. Along with that is 3 copies of Sinister Choke. Of course, we know how good Sinister Choke is. It's still very, very in demand. 5 life cards unpreventable is great. And if your opponent sets up their board, which we could see board come back, which is a big deal, you deal out the damage, it's unstoppable and banished, so that helps facilitate Black Foreshadowing a little bit more. That helps get guaranteed damage through. There's a lot that this attack can do, and it's still a completely worthwhile consideration, even without any kinds of modifiers. 5 life cards is still a very respectable physical attack, and it looks really good. I mean, just look at the card artwork. We all know how good it looks. And lastly, we have 3 copies of one of our favorite combat enders, Android 18's Armbreaker. It's not here for damage. It's never really been here for damage, because compared to the other physicals and our other energy attacks as well, it's weak. It's honestly weak. But you do get the benefit of a little extra anger, which this deck doesn't have a lot of, so I guess that's cool. You get stage drain on your opponent. They lose 2 stages, so you can really kind of stage lock them between that and the amount of damage if it hits, so that's a big deal. Plus, you get the ability to end combat, which brings our current combat ender count up to 6. So that's a big deal right there. And that's the main reason it's in here. Android 18 loves the ability to disrupt and end combat. And it may actually see a return of cards like Blue Battle Drill or Stomach Crusher, just to kind of get around that. I can actually see that being the case here really, really soon. Next is the physical blocks. Of course, we need to have some of those in there, considering how popular physical decks are in the metagame right now. And Black has a great suite of them. We have a full set 3 copies of Black Finger Block. Of course, we know how good Black Finger Block is. 1 endurance is nice to have, gain stages, that's nice to have, does everything we need it to. And then 3 copies of Black Delay. Of course, this is just a fantastic card right now, especially after the change that if the card doesn't contain banish after use, card goes back to hand, your opponent discards 1 from their hand. But this has even more traction now because there are a lot of physical attacks that are on MP stacks, so it's very easy to play delay and force an opponent to lose a card from their hand, which is an especially big deal considering you've got so many MPs that can draw additional cards into their hand. See also the Goku MP stack, so it's something that you want to have the ability to disrupt cards out of their hand. Once again, especially because Devious is gone, so it gains a lot of traction here. But there are other physical blocks you can include if you really want to. If you want a little more anger, you can switch to Black Knee Catch or Black Stop to gain you some extra anger. And in the case of Black Stop, you get more hand insight, so that's nice. You could throw in Black Upward Dodge if you want to deal additional damage. That's definitely a consideration. But I like Delay in here as a means of just disrupting your opponent at what could be a really, really bad time, or forcing a card back to their hand that may not necessarily be an issue in order to discard out a card that might be a big issue. There's a lot this card can do. Of course, we all just know how good it is. We already know. I've already said enough. And lastly, we have our energy combat cards, in which we have a very considerable amount of energy combats for a deck. And that's one thing that I really like about Conflict Mastery, is that with the additional stage gain and all the gain from other blocks and cards, it's very easy to continue to string along a lot of energy attacks. On which one thing that is notably missing out of this deck, as I mentioned that, is there's not Allied Blitz in this deck. Allied Blitz is not in here. It's something that could be a worthwhile consideration if Energy Beats picks back up, especially in this deck. Continue to gain a lot of stages, force your opponent to skip their actions, just unload on them for a bunch of damage, and then you can end combat with one of your various combat enders. So it's a very easy card to set up with, and it could be great in this deck, but it is not in this version. Maybe in a future version, who knows. But we start off our list of energy combat cards with 3 Black Swirl. Of course, this is Black's most notable energy attack. Snipe out any card in your opponent's hand, so you can hit a block if you want to, so that you can guarantee this goes through. You can hit that Unleash that's in their hands, that way they can't play it. You can hit so many different options here, especially when you've got hand insight from cards like Stare Down and Black Flashback. So it's easy to get it running. On hit, it gains 2 anger, so it is a little bit extra anger gain outside of 18's Armbreaker. So it actually is possible to kind of level without having to utilize Unleashed, but it's not the main reason that it's here. It's just here for the raw disruption. That's exactly what you want this for. After that is one of my favorite new Awakening cards for Black, and it's one that I think a lot of players kind of overlooked, and that's Black Annihilation. Black Annihilation is a 2-for-4 energy attack, so it still hits the crit threshold. You banish 3 cards from your opponent's discard pile, hit raise your anger 1, and there's a parenthetical that if it's destroyed from the top of the life deck, you can rejuvenate this card, and the top or bottom card of your life deck, I don't remember which one, but that's only if it's by one of your effects, so this is never going to get off in this deck. The deck, doesn't have that, but it's a really beneficial energy attack. So you get extra discard pile hate, which is a huge deal right now. Even just Unleashed by itself is enough reason to warrant including discard pile hate in your deck. It's got 2 endurance on it. 2 for 4 is very reasonable. It's one that's tested well, one that I really like. You want ways to banish out those cards. You want them, and this card is absolutely great for that. And lastly, for our styled energy attacks is 3 copies of Black Extreme Blast. And now you see what I meant when I was talking about Unleashed targets. This is our Unleashed target, and it's okay. It's alright, it's not great. 3 for 6 is slightly expensive, but it's still very reasonable damage in this deck. I do like having that. But it's not often you'll get off the attached effect, in which whenever you mill cards from your opponent's deck, you may lower their anger 1. There's only like 1 card in this deck that's going to do that. But of course, it's not why it's here. It's here for our attached target. And as far as that goes, that's perfectly fine. Did try Black Vehicle Toss in here, which it was okay, but you can only have 1 attached at a time, so at maximum you're going to level 1 level with Unleashed. And that's not what you want. You want to level as fast as possible. Being able to stack multiple attached cards is a huge deal, and that's kind of why it's here. Also considered Black Android Programming in combination with Android 18's Toss, but it doesn't really facilitate much in this deck because there aren't any effects that banish cards off the life deck, so that really didn't do too much good either. So I decided to go with an actual attack, and it does alright. If there's ever a better attached card for villains, it'll probably go in here in place of this, but you need something, and this is what we got. Next is 2 copies of arguably one of the best freestyle energy attacks in the game right now, Vilnius Powerball. 2 for 4, which is again great. Lower your opponent's anger 2, and prevent 4 stages of damage from all of your opponent's attacks for the remainder of combat, which combined with 18's ability to shut off modifiers is huge. It means even the strongest of attacks will only deal just a couple of stages of damage, which is really easy to wick off between the mastery and some of your blocks and stage gaining cards. So this is a huge benefit. It fulfills a lot for this deck, and it's almost essential in a lot of villain decks that aren't explicitly anger. It's so worthwhile. Next is 2 copies of Vilnius Energy Beam, again going back to specifically Villainous. This does the same amount of damage as Black Extreme Blast, 3 stages for 6 life cards. However, this one lowers your opponent's anger 3, and it's banished, which banished damage again facilitates foreshadowing. Lowering your opponent's anger is big because Black's anger hate isn't very good. It's got a little extra endurance on it. It's a really nice energy attack, very sizable, and it's nice to have that extra leeway of damage, especially in light of the Devious Mastery being frozen. So we want a little bit more power in here, and that's exactly what we got with this card. And lastly, we have 2 copies of our last combat ender, Blinding Energy Move. We all know how good Blinding Energy Move is. Sure, banishing 2 off the top of your life deck can be really risky, especially considering we've got other combat enders in here. But this is a nice way to deal a little extra damage and get the heckles out of dodge. So that's exactly what this card does. It brings our total of combat enders up to 8. which is a lot. So it's very, very easy to see yourself just drawing into combat enders turn after turn after turn, just really messing with your opponent. So I love having that in this deck. I love all these combat enders. They're a huge deal, and I enjoy it so, so much. Lastly, we have our energy blocks. We've got 3 copies of Black Swipe. Again, another way to banish out cards from the opponent's discard pile, which is big. 2 endurance. Again, that's great. And our last new card from Awakening is our last energy block. 3 copies of Black Flinch. Now, this is an outrageously good block for black. Again, another one with 2 endurance, that's great. But you block with it, and your next style attacks combat deals plus 4 life cards of damage. So that's, oh my god, that is so good. It modifies your defensive burst or your swirl or your extreme blast. You can do huge amounts of damage with this. If it were any attack like black upward dodge, it'd be even more amazing. But I'm totally okay with it being styled. It needs to have a balance somewhere. And it adds a little bit more of that aggro element to this deck, which is something that we like having. But this deck it's actually been a lot of fun. I really do enjoy playing Android 18, and of course this deck does have its own weaknesses. It's not super strong on the anger hate front, so speed anger decks will likely beat it out relatively well. Anything that keeps a whole lot of pressure on Android 18, especially more defensive decks, they're like Dragon Ball Victory oriented decks, easy ones that have ways to kind of wick off damage. Those are really going to hurt here because you don't really have crit on command in this deck, and that kind of sucks. Sure, the threshold has been lowered, but all it takes is 1 card with endurance on it, and there you go, you're basically through with the idea of critting your opponent. And there's not any unpreventable damage in here. I decided to opt out of Android 20 Ally because it does have a considerable amount of risk to it, especially with all the ally hate that's going to be going around. Crits, Tug of War, things like that. It's a little bit too risky to play for its own good. There was also I'll Dig Your Grave in here, but it did lose out on room because it wasn't as consistent of a leveling mechanism as Unleashed. And while the unpreventable damage is a huge deal, you run out of room at some point. I didn't want to cut it, but I decided to. If you have it, then go on ahead and include it. You could probably cut out Android 18's Armbreaker if you don't need the combat enders, or maybe Black Annihilation or something like that. There are plenty of cards that you could swap out for it. But I have been enjoying this deck just a lot. It's been so much fun to play. It actually feels like 18 has some traction. And it is challenging to play for a black deck. It certainly is, because Conflict is not an easy mastery to play by any means. It doesn't hold your hand like Devious did, and it's not like super gimmicky like Perceptive felt, but it actually takes some thought, actually takes a little bit more strategy, and that's actually what I like, because I felt spoiled as a black player. I felt spoiled with Devious, because like, my mastery sits here and it gives me free stuff. This mastery doesn't necessarily do that, and you have to be a little more proactive with it, more proactive with your card pool. There are a lot of options here that can always change, but this is what I've got. I've been enjoying it, and I hope you guys enjoy it as well. So that's going to do it for this episode of Bad Builds. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, be sure to click that like button down below. I would love to see your guys' thumbs, get all those likes going there. If not, click the dislike button and let me know what you guys didn't like, so that way I can change it for future editions of Bad Builds. Also, if you guys haven't hit that subscribe button down below, please be sure to do so you can follow this series and all of our other series that we've got going on. Of course, I mentioned that we've got our Xenoverse 2 playthrough going on, and the link to that is down below. We've got some new card game videos that will be coming up soon. I'm going to update this series a little bit more regularly for you guys. Hopefully we'll have some matches up here soon. It's going to be a lot of stuff going on, so be sure to keep an eye out for all of that. And lastly, if you guys haven't found us on social media, all those links are down below too. So you guys can find us on Facebook, Twitter, Twitch, and Libsyn. So be sure to check all those out. Go listen to some of our podcasts and just come say hey. We'd love to interact with you guys. So that's doing it for this video. I'm Eric with Team Badman signing out. So thank you guys for watching. And like always, stay bad. We'll see you guys next time. Catch you later.